Now, if you're tired all the time, right? Because your blood doesn't carry oxygen well, what happens when you go to sleep? You lay down to go to sleep, your respiratory rate gets very shallow. So the oxygen level in your blood drops. So now as your respiratory rate drops and the blood oxygen level drops, you're marginally suffocating. And so what happens is as you start to get into a deep sleep, your brain wakes you up to keep your body out of a deep sleep because your brain is keeping you from suffocating. Then people do the worst thing. Same thing happens to people with sleep issues. We're going to get into your labs in a second, and I'm going to explain why people that are the most exhausted, why they sleep the worst. Because you think it would be the opposite, right? You think that people that are really exhausted, the only thing they do well is sleep. But actually, the people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst. And I'm going to point out what they need to look at in the labs to fix that. But the majority of people that are listening to this podcast right now that have really poor sleep patterns or have just a really tough time sleeping. The reason why they have a tough time sleeping is because when they lay down to go to sleep and their body tired, their mind is awake. If you ask them, they will tell you, I'm not sleeping because my mind is awake, not because I'm not tired. So what happens is as their environment quiets, their mind wakes up. So why does your mind wake up at night when there's no stimulus? It's because there's a category of neurotransmitters in our brain called catecholamines. Okay, these are fight or flight neurotransmitters: dopamine, norepinephrine, ephedrine, adrenaline. When these neurotransmitters start to rise, what they do is they create a wakened state. If they continue to rise, you'll feel anxious. If they rise further, you'll feel anxiety. If they continue to rise, you can have paranoias or even a full-blown panic attack. So if we realize that as a certain class of neurotransmitters rises, our mind enters a wakened state. And if we realize that if we don't have the right raw material in our body, specifically the right complex of B vitamins, methylfolate, a form of B12 called methylcobalamin, which is just a form of the light metal B12, then what happens is we have a difficult time breaking these neurotransmitters down, quieting these neurotransmitters. So at night, our mind wakes up. And what we'll do is we'll ruminate on the most innocuous little shit. Like you will lay there just thinking, did I get everything on my grocery list? Did my belt match my shoes? Should I have a Thanksgiving Day party with my family? You'll just ruminate on the most nonsensical things, and it will just eat away at your sleep for hours. And people get frustrated because they realize I'm exhausted, but I can't fall asleep. As soon as you put the right raw materials back into the human body, methylated nutrients, very often their mind starts to quiet down at night, and they don't have to tranquilize themselves to go to sleep. And so a lot of the conditions that we accept as a consequence of aging, or, little Johnny's just got attention deficit disorder, but everybody's got attention deficit disorder. I have a hard time falling asleep, but I'm in my 40s and I got 3 kids and I shouldn't fall asleep. But none of that is true. These are not consequences of aging. They are consequences of missing raw material in our bodies. And these raw materials are very easy to put back in. So back to faith, sorry.
No, that's, I struggle with all these.
Yeah, so do a lot of your listeners, I promise you.
Oh yeah, I have one of the biggest veteran audiences in the world, in the country. So we all struggle with sleep. So that was super informative. And
the challenge with sleep very often, and I want to get into it in your labs because I think we can solve this issue for a lot of your listeners. Number one, they should be looking at taking methylated vitamins, taking methylfolate at night, taking magnesium at night, the light metals that create the deficiency that make it hard to quiet the mind. The second thing they ought to really think about is getting their blood work done and getting some data and looking at their hormone levels in men, very specifically testosterone, because it's very hard for most physicians to link deficiencies in a hormone like testosterone to poor sleep patterns. But what happens is testosterone, and we can talk about this further with your labs, but testosterone, one of its primary roles is actually not male characteristics. That's why women are afraid of testosterone therapy, because they think it leads to facial hair and aggression and big muscles and a deep voice, and that's actually not true. One of the primary roles of the hormone testosterone in men and women is to actually put pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. So this is called erythropoiesis, right? And the production of new red blood cells. Same thing happens when you go to altitude, for example. So let's say you have low testosterone and you have low production of red blood cells. You don't have anemia, but you have a very low red blood cell count. So what does this mean? You have very few vehicles in your blood to transport oxygen. Okay, and this hides in plain sight. So people that have sleep issues or energy issues should listen really closely, because you'll go get your blood work done by a physician and there's a range for red blood cells. So it will be within range, but you'll be down in the bottom 10 percentile. Then there's a second thing on your labs called hemoglobin, which is kind of like the fluid in the red blood cell. It tells you how much hemoglobin is in that cell. And that's in the bottom 10 or 15 percentile. They're in the normal range. But what happens when I start to delete red blood cells from the bloodstream and when I start to drain them of hemoglobin, and I'm oversimplifying this for a moment, is I have less fluid to carry oxygen. And what's the result of that? I'm tired. I'm tired because I'm hypoxic. And I'm hypoxic because I'm low on red blood cells. And I'm low on red blood cells very often because I'm deficient in the hormone testosterone. And so when somebody says they're low on energy, if you convert that statement to physiology, they're almost saying I'm low on red blood cells. I'm low on hemoglobin. Maybe because I'm low on testosterone, which is why I really believe that people should get hormone panels done. And not everybody needs to be on testosterone. There are lots of ways to raise it without taking the hormone. My point is, now if you're tired all the time, right, because your blood doesn't carry oxygen well, what happens when you go to sleep? You lay down to go to sleep, your respiratory rate gets very shallow, right? You take shallow breaths. So the oxygen level in your blood drops. Well, your blood's already poor at carrying oxygen. So now as your respiratory rate drops and the blood oxygen level drops, you're marginally suffocating. And so what happens is, as you start to get into a deep sleep, your brain wakes you up. You will pulse cortisol at night to keep your body out of a deep sleep because your brain is keeping you from suffocating. Then people do the worst thing. Instead of fixing their hormone and raising their red blood cell count, they actually go to their doctor and say, "Doc, I can't sleep." The doc gives them zolpidem nitrate, diazepam, Xanax,
Ambien.
Lesta, Ambien, whatever it is. What a lot of these drugs do is they essentially blindfold the brain's view of blood oxygen. And it allows you to get into a sleep because your brain won't wake you up. But then you wake up in the morning and go, "Man, I hate taking Tylenol PM because it's still in my system the next morning." Or when I wake up from Ambien, I'm really groggy and I'm foggy. That medication's been out of your system for hours. You are feeling the effects of having suffocated for 6 hours. That's why you're groggy. That's why you can't focus. That's why you're sore and stiff and achy.
Wow.
So if you went back and fixed the hormones very often, you would fix the signal to the bone marrow, you would fix the red blood cell count, which would fix the oxygen transport, which would not only give you more energy, but it would deepen your sleep.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Makes a hell of a lot of sense.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.